Hello there, and welcome to the second in a series. And today's little run through before the session is from open source to open world. Why 3D now more than ever? So, looking at our agenda, we'll discuss exactly that. Then we'll do a quick team exercise and contribute to the open source resource library. We'll have our guests, Juliana Heno and Stephen Cavalier. Juliana was a graphic designer and is now a additive manufacturing researcher and PhD with it. So, quite interesting to have a conversation with her about the research route as a career. And Stephen Cavalier is an animation director and scriptwriter. And stars are aligning for him, having had all that experience. He is very well placed to create content, transmedia content, moving forward, and content for the metaverse. So all topics we will touch upon today. And then at the end of the session, continuing with the Blender Skilling Up task. So why now more than ever? There's certainly been a trajectory to 3D. And this first diagram, top left, is from 2006, as you can see, and it starts to outline Web 2, and Web 3.0. And it's a little bit more aggressive and optimistic, saying that Web 3 is going to begin in 2005, which it kind of has. And when you look at sites like THREE.JS, which is JavaScript 3D, you can kind of see how 3D has become much more prevalent in terms of storytelling. It has relied on a few things, so cloud computing, processing power, kind of efficiencies around that. And as technology has evolved and the hardware has evolved, we are now kind of heading towards the top of that peak on the green triangle and way beyond. We are now having news hot off the press like Facebook, who have now changed their name to Meta and are committing to creating their vision of the metaverse. But UX and UI and the web has evolved as an industry too, and we're now looking at HMIs, which are human-machine interfaces. So we're using 3D because we know 3D is an effective communication tool. It removes any misinterpretation. So, all roads lead to 3D. That's kind of where we are heading. Open source tools are disrupting professional software giants. It's the fantastic open source movement that has really shaken things up and brought artists and developers together to create amazing tools, technologies, and revolutionary pipelines that put the focus back on creativity and collaboration. So starting with open source, accessible, customizable, and shareable. A real shift in mindset. It's not necessarily about intellectual property and owning intellectual property. It's about getting it out there in the hands of people and seeing what people do with it, letting people manipulate it and distribute it. Really fantastic. It began as a response to limitations of proprietary code and really source code that is made freely available for possible modification and redistribution, as we've just mentioned. But the main principle of open source software development is peer production, people working together with products such as source code, blueprints, and documentation, making it freely available to the public. So open source software is a part of open source mentality. And, we're looking specifically at 3D, but open source software is now pervasive across many industries. So, you can get open source accounting software, for example. We're looking at 3D in this session. So why, oh why, have I got you to concentrate on using Blender initially? Well, Blender, as we know, is open source, and by being open source, it establishes new models to monetize and further its own development. So users donate, or organizations contribute to the development fund. So very recently, Apple, for example, have contributed to Blender's development fund, and possibly a year ago now, Unreal Engine contributed over $1 million to Blender. You know, just to say, guys, you're doing an amazing job and we want to be part of your story. Now, the thing that interests me specifically about the relationship between Blender and Unreal Engine is that we are at a transitional point with Unreal Engine. We're moving from 4.27, which we currently are, and next year we will be going into Unreal Engine 5. Again, a very good reason to be learning Unreal now. Now, in Unreal Engine, there aren't particularly very good 3D editing and modeling tools, but I suspect that in the coming months and versions of Unreal Engine, we'll see greater and greater integration of Blender. You know, 1.2 million, I think it was quite a great incentive to closely align the two open source softwares. And Unreal Engine, as mentioned, is open source itself. So, you know, big gaming companies create their own versions of Unreal Engine that the code is so transparent. But with Unreal Engine and its accessibility, they are also kind of buying up other technologies. So QUIXEL, which is a huge library of materials and 3D assets, kind of film grade, film quality assets, as well as the MetaHuman creator, are all available to Unreal Engine users for free. Unreal Engine are particularly generous, and you know, even if you create something as a commercial product, they don't want to get any royalties from you until you have cleared $1 million gross profit. So, you know, of course, there are lots of other specialist software out there, but we'll concentrate on this as a kind of pipeline because I believe, as mentioned, the relationship between Blender and moving forward Unreal Engine and Unreal Engine's impact on the industry and many industries is where the money is. So why can Unreal Engine do it compared to their competitors? Well, we have to thank FORTNITE, simply because it's in-app paid itinerary items, etc. for users has just gone through the roof. You know, the development playground has been funded by Generation Z and Alpha. Some of you may have contributed to that too. But what that's transpired to is that FORTNITE generated 5.1 billion in revenue in 2020 for Epic Games. And that's a 37% increase from the year 2018. So huge amounts of money, which not only means that Epic Games can give Unreal Engine away for free, but it also means that they can use that money to develop FORTNITE as a platform and the technologies that drive that platform. So now all those technologies that are available to developers at Epic Games to make FORTNITE are now packaged with Unreal Engine and available for all of us to use. So it really drives the technology forward as well. You know, quite recently we saw the Travis Scott and the Ariana Grande gigs, which were a real demonstration of how gaming engines are contributing to the transmedia landscape. So open worlds are more than just virtual locations. So there's been a great history of exploration. It's kind of innate human need to explore worlds. And that has, and was first kind of conceived with a bit of gaming history here, in 1970, the Jet Rocket Flight Simulator was deemed the first open world game. And over the years, we've kind of seen a huge growth in open world maps and their scale. Now, there's a great YouTube video here, which is kind of a visual aid which runs through and demonstrates all of the variations and history of open world maps. It's a really, really great video, so do make sure you watch that. But we've come to a point where we're now having to procedurally generate these worlds because they are so vast. So No Man's Sky works in exactly that way. You know, it has a few kind of established rules and is built programmatically and generated procedurally. So, you know, it's given rules and the worlds are generated. So open worlds have come from gaming, but are now being built to be able to be used in TV and film productions, which we'll see later in our virtual production section. So open worlds and multiplayer become a powerful combination, and they are the creators of communities. Minecraft, for example, has a community of 150 million active users as registered in March 2021. Roblox actually overtook Minecraft with 199 million active users, and FORTNITE at its peak had 350 million users until the Apple spat because of their mobile platform, and that went down to 230 million active users. So these worlds are there again to be explored. They give tools to users to create within them, and we are participating now. We're not passive. You know, my generation consumed media passively, but we are now kind of being conditioned and trained to contribute and comment and review. So we're not just creators, we're critics as well. And this kind of innate need to create has been given to us by these simpler tools to be able to do that. So people who might have deemed themselves not creative at all are now in a position to express themselves using simple tools and intuitive tools. And gaming has also had a drive towards realism, of course, and that has meant that computation not only deals with high fidelity graphics, but people also want to be fully immersed in these worlds. So the physics has to be accurate for it to be convincing. And, you know, we've taken things like a game such as Microsoft Flight Simulator here on the top left, and basically made it so real that you can play with a gamepad, of course, but you can also play with a full rig and a professional flying yoke. And, you know, professional pilots were involved in the game development. So, you know, you can quite happily fly around the whole globe and land at any airport in the world. The other extent of that is real world digital twins. That sounds like an oxymoron. So digital twins of real world locations, let me put it that way. So here, for example, we have Helsinki, which has had a digital twin created of it so that different simulations can be run on that location to see the implications of certain logistical changes. You know, maybe changing a bus route, for example. What impact does that have on air quality, for example? You know, suddenly where we were playing around in worlds like Sims and Civilizations, we can now simulate using actual live data and make policy decisions on that. So we're gamifying our cities purely on a simulation basis to be able to make better decisions. Tesla, another company that have fully embraced this idea of simulation, not only just in their crash testing, but they are now also using a game engine simulated world to train their autopilot system on edge cases. So they do use their fleet of cars to update the algorithms to deal with self-driving. But, you know, there are edge cases which you'll never necessarily come across, but the system needs to be trained on them to know what to do in those situations. So this image on the bottom right, well, actually the image in the middle and the bottom right are both from the simulation. And the bottom right image specifically is a family running down the motorway, which is very unlikely to get from a fleet camera in a car, real world data. So fine, let's just simulate it in engine and make sure that the autopilot knows how to handle that situation in the real world. So looking at open world, we looked last week at the ambition of someone like Inyo Asano, an individual who has now the tools available to him to create a whole world as a place of inspiration and to get a perspective and a new view on his own drawing. So that's the power of an individual. And we spoke briefly with James, who has created this still life studio in Blender so that he has control over lighting and position and camera angles and lenses, for example. So, what is the natural and scalable extension of that? Virtual production is becoming more and more prevalent because it's a huge cost-saving exercise. You can create an LED cove. These are quite small in their setup, but because the camera rigs are being used to do fairly close to middle range shots, what can be achieved is that the control is there once again. So in a similar vein to James's still life photo studio, now the virtual production stages can blend real world objects and some set dressing with LED screen backdrops. Now there are some pitfalls to this because they are LED screens. So what you'll note most of the time when you see some use of virtual production, particularly in the Mandalorian, they are very much backdrops and they are slightly out of focus because you have to be careful of things like moire. But I really love the image on the right-hand side here because you can see this fantastic light box on the ceiling. And it just shows how with a Wacom tablet, you can kind of paint in and paint out light to cast light in a different way on the set itself. So it's incredibly malleable. And because real-time engines are being used, for example, on the top left here, if the director of photography and the director had a conversation about wanting to move this rock here, they can just pick it up and move it. So we'll have a look at how all of this comes together in a production and watch this video here on the virtual production of the VW-ID4 campaign. The link is in the description below. So Marshall McLuhan, who is a philosopher and media theorist, as I'm sure you all are aware, said this about nascent technologies and the impact that they have. So it is the framework which changes with each new technology and not just the picture in the frame. So how does that manifest on a day-to-day level? Now we've got some very a collection of charts now, and I'm only going to kind of flick through them fairly quickly. We're not going to kind of study them in great detail, but if we recall our triangle from last week of time, money, people, and why I think 3D is the way to go forward because it's quick, empowering, and free. What does that mean when you are working part of a production or a team? So we're looking here at the virtual production pipeline versus a traditional production pipeline at the top. So the thing really to note is, without going into massive detail, is that the traditional production pipeline is linear. It's very siloed. There's just a bit of back and forth between the VFX supplier and the editor. But ultimately, if you want to change anything, you have to come back to an earlier stage and then get everyone else involved again. So I would say actually the preparation section in this diagram is probably a bit wrong, as it's only representing a pipeline. If this was also representing a timeline in terms of how long all of this took, actually the top diagram would probably be twice to almost 3 times as long So do bear that in mind. It's not kind of proportionate in time. We're not saying they both take the same time, but this is the only difference. To kind of avoid having to come back on yourself, I would say that the preparation would take way, way, way more. But comparing this to the virtual production timeline, you can see immediately that there is a greater flow of movement between departments, and that ultimately is collaboration. We can see that, you know, even post-production can have an impact on the story. So because all this stuff is happening in real time and you're moving elements in the set, you're controlling the lighting, you can say, oh, okay, actually, well, I prefer this camera angle now because the light is falling different because we've moved this set element. And things can be trialed on the day without necessarily having to be locked down before, as would be the case in a traditional production pipeline. So the same is true for animation. You know, we're looking at this central section here where we're actually bringing in live data from motion capture, but we can do some virtual cinematography and just move the camera and lighting rigs around live. And all of this is kind of happening concurrently. It's not kind of broken down into individual stages, which would be the case normally. So there's quite an eclectic mix of diagrams here. Here, for example, this is a animation rendering pipeline. So here, you know, we've got these bottlenecks where we're having to render out things to be able to review them. Whereas here in the real-time rendering next gen, you know, we can preview things in real time pretty successfully. And, you know, even just doing style frames, for example, are much, much quicker because you're rendering things out in seconds, not in minutes or hours. So, you know, the path to the final version is way, way, way quicker than a traditional pipeline. And this is very specific, but this looks at character animation and creation. And, you know, here, the thing that just drew my attention to it and the reason why I wanted to add it in was that the traditional workflow, firstly, is 9 steps, but it is about employing a team. And here, this new revised, revolutionized pipeline devised by ZBrush and how you can bring in animated characters to Unreal Engine, once again, focuses on an individual, a single artist working in 6 steps. So, you know, again, just to illustrate the point, this is what's happening across the industry and industries as they're realizing the power of real time. So it's tricky to keep abreast of all this stuff because it is an ever-changing landscape. But the things that I tune into, which I really recommend, is the fantastic 2 Minute Papers YouTube channel, which is kind of geek heaven, basically. It covers everything from AI to graphics to simulation to just sort of seeing what's being done at kind of university and research, even corporate research based level, kind of ahead of time, so you can kind of see how things will eventually trickle down to things like Unreal Engine and become accessible to all of us. And Unreal Engine themselves publish great white papers and field guides to really give you an understanding of how all of this is working in different industries. There was a link to the virtual production field guide, but have a look at the list of available documents there. You know, it is a bit of dense reading in some cases, but just to, again, familiarize yourself with the language that's being used so you can understand the concepts is really, really important just to become up to speed with what's going on. So, Transmedia. Convergence is only just getting started. So Transmedia has been around for a while. One way of thinking about it is to think of it as interconnected universes. So all these different ways of consuming media. I really like the way that Reflector Entertainment put this together here, is that they create scalable transmedia story worlds which enable vastly unique and individual experiences, connecting fans across the multiple media verticals of gaming, film, comics, novels, music, podcasts, and other entertainment mediums, encouraging deeper engagement with a brand. Who has done this in an exemplary way? Star Wars, you can come in to the story at any point, be it through a game, be it through a book, be it through one of the original films, and all of the content is complementary but can be self-referential. There's a real kind of complexity to it, but as consumers we just deal with it on a piece-by-piece basis, so we don't get overwhelmed by it, but we constantly build up the picture of the greater world that we're inhabiting through the narratives that we consume. It really sets a gold standard of how sophisticated these parallel stories can be, and as a result, it's an incredibly successful cross-generational franchise. It's having these multiple different points of entry, which I think is really fascinating, and something that only becomes more and more prevalent as we have access to more and more technology and the way that we engage with it, and the stories are told to us through those technologies. So one film I'd like us just to watch now is this great talk with Efshi Opdenbush. Absolutely butchered her name, I apologize. And she talks of transmedia storytelling. And yes, there are kind of analytics and ethical issues, but also a huge amount of opportunities. So link in the description below, but let's watch this video now. So one thing which is clear, and one thing which we have been conditioned and have been trained to do really since the advent of social media, is that alongside the convergence of media, we have become more and more involved. As mentioned before, my generation was pretty passive. Social media made people contribute. We're posting, we're commenting, we're critiquing, we're sharing, we're thumbing up, we're thumbing down. And this kind of participatory culture, as Henry Jenkins calls it, is something that is innate in who we are. We like to create, and we like to make sure that we feel that we can do that. And social media has really given us the ability to contribute on an unprecedented scale, because there's a relatively low barrier for engagement. We just have to be part of it, download it. We can choose to contribute or just to sort of passively absorb content. But we also like platforms that give a strong support for sharing creations with others. There's also kind of informal mentorship going on in the way that things are liked, or we understand who our audience is sometimes by just reviewing how people respond to what we post. And people who are posting things believe that their contributions matter, and we do care whether something we post is liked or not liked. So all of this is leading towards us skilling up in our abilities to use different technologies, and we willingly do that, and we willingly share that. And we've been kind of conditioned into this, and we will continue to do that as other tools, more sophisticated tools, become available to us to be able to participate in 3D as well. One thing that has become really obvious has been the kind of advent of monetizing content. And, we as individuals online are very concerned with our identity. We may have multiple identities, but where these kind of open source free models of games such as FORTNITE have in-app purchases, the thing that becomes the commodity is our identity. We are willing to pay to be different. And that is a really sort of fascinating area of development, where we are now seeing digital-only fashion platforms becoming available and in preparation for having a metaverse with identity, and where identity can be explored. So, we had big news last night. I don't know if anybody watched it, that Facebook have now committed to Meta, alongside creating particular tools to be able to give creators the ability to contribute and, again, participate to the building of the metaverse. They understand that they can't do it themselves. So rather than try and do it themselves, they're building the tools to enable creators to build the metaverse. So what's interesting is that this is a whole nascent technology where there's going to be a huge amount of opportunity to have businesses that exist entirely in the metaverse. So looking at where identity has created so much revenue for people, it's a kind of no-brainer, isn't it? It's like, well, okay, let's create 3D content for people because that's what they're willing to pay for. So we can see how even big brands have managed to bridge the offline online by creating content that works in both. So, for example, Louis Vuitton created a collection specifically and uniquely for League of Legends. And because of its success, they actually made a kind of physical collection as well in the real world. But some platforms are just interested in being digital only. So, entirely sustainable models where all they're doing is creating digital assets and selling those on, but giving, again, people the ability to customize and create unique versions of those to define and explore their own identities within the metaverse. And it's not necessarily about one identity. Here on the bottom left, in FORTNITE, you can have 15, 20 different avatars and explore different identities within that framework. So it's incredibly liberating and somewhat complex. But, that's kind of what we are conditioning ourselves to be able to manage and kind of dip in and out of, having these kind of multiple personality types as part of our characters. And with all of this does come huge opportunities. We see things like Killtopia, which started as a Kickstarter campaign for a printed comic, which has now gained funding to be a TV series that's going to be created in Unreal Engine. We see platforms like Super Social, or companies like Super Social, who are using the Roblox platform to create games for the metaverse. And Roblox itself is a tool, as is Minecraft, as is Fortnite Creative. These are the tools that are being given to us to be able to create unique experiences that we can monetize and turn into businesses in the metaverse. So this is all happening as we speak. And coming back to the kind of generosity of particular organizations, Epic Mega Grant, for example, they've given 100 million to developers just to develop ideas. You can submit a proposal with a small prototype to Epic, and if they deem it progressive and is moving on the industry and it's going to contribute to the community at large, you will become a Mega Grant recipient. So Unreal Engine Fellowship, for example, is a paid workshop. You are paid, I think it's $10,000 to learn Unreal Engine over a 6-week period. This is mainly targeted at professionals to transition across from other technologies to Unreal Engine. But the fact that they are paying people to do that, is absolutely unheard of. And again, shows how Unreal Engine are reinvesting in themselves and the people that use the platform to be able to just drive things ever forward. And money is being carved out to be able to create content moving forward. So Epic Games has invested $1 billion to build its Unreal Engine powered metaverse. And, that will filter down into things like the Mega Grant. And yesterday, Facebook, or Meta, dedicated, or rather they committed to $150 million to train the next generation of creators to build immersive learning content. So, their goal is to provide a way for as many creators as possible to build a business in the metaverse. So there's huge opportunities coming. All of this is driven by 3D and your imagination. So I just wanted to finish off with a couple of quotes, and there's a great set of articles here from a company called Voltaku. But one of the things I really liked about their article was this quote that was from the CEO, Charles Borland. So, game engines are giving studios a flexibility we've never seen before. When we option a project, it doesn't have to stop at a movie or a TV series anymore. We can take our 3D production assets and build a game, VR, AR experiences, marketing materials, digital goods, basically anything we want. How liberating is that? And secondly, this very timely comment from an ex-student of mine who now works at AKQA. And his first project required him to learn Unreal Engine, or aspects of Unreal Engine. So that was great affirmation with what I've been banging on about to my students for the last 2 or 3 years. And, it's not insurmountable. So in the spirit of open source, let's share our resources. So let's do this now, and you can kind of click through some of the links. I've asked our guests to contribute to this as well, and feel free to share it with your peers. But, let's just kind of get a library together of links where we can just kind of share what's free. Ultimately, it's not necessarily about just finding things that are free. These are references. I'd still encourage you to do your own art direction and create your own images, but these are a reference library that we can share. So that's it for part 2, and thank you very much.